It is the third week of October, 1941. The village of Ophé, in the Seine-Maritime department of occupied northern France, is quiet in the way that occupied places are always quiet. Not with peace, but with the held breath of a population learning to be invisible. The morning mist sits low over the fields, and the smell of damp earth mingles with the distant diesel of a German motorized patrol making its rounds along the road toward Dieppe. In a small, whitewashed farmhouse on the edge of the village, a woman in her early 30s sits at a kitchen table. Her name is Marguerite Claire Beaumont. She is, by training and by the papers she carries, a district nurse. She is, by every other measure that matters, a British intelligence operative working for the Special Operations Executive. And at this precise moment, she is doing something that would seem, to any casual observer, entirely unremarkable. She is dismantling a toaster. It is not her toaster. It was requisitioned, a word the Germans used for stolen, from the kitchen of a Jewish family who no longer lived in their house. A Wehrmacht corporal had used it for 6 months before growing bored of it, and had left it in the communal kitchen of the farmhouse now occupied by 4 German enlisted men, and in the back room by Marguerite herself, who had offered her nursing services to the local garrison as cover and had been, with the particular arrogance of the occupier, accepted without much scrutiny. The toaster is a Siemens model, manufactured in 1938. A solid, over-engineered piece of German domestic appliance. Its nichrome resistance wire is wound with a precision that speaks to a culture that builds things to last. Marguerite unwound it very carefully at 2 in the morning, working by a single candle, with the patience of someone who had once spent 12 hours repairing the circuitry of a damaged field telephone in a Yorkshire training facility. Within 3 weeks, using that wire, 2 stolen condensers, a salvaged valve from a broken wireless set found in a bombed-out tabac, and a frame constructed from the metal rails of a discarded picture frame, she will build a functioning clandestine transmitter capable of reaching a receiving station in southern England. This is the story of how she did it, why it mattered, and why almost no one has ever heard her name. To understand what Marguerite Beaumont was attempting, you must first understand what the Special Operations Executive actually needed from its agents in occupied France in the autumn of 1941, and why getting it out was so perilous as to be, in many cases, simply impossible. The SOE had been established by Winston Churchill in July 1940 with the famous instruction to set Europe ablaze. Its agents were being inserted into France, Belgium, the Netherlands, and beyond. But the entire enterprise rested on one technological foundation without which nothing else could function: communication. Without the ability to transmit intelligence back to London, an agent was, in practical terms, little more than a very brave tourist. The standard wireless sets issued to SOE agents in the early years of the war were themselves a compromise born of desperate necessity. The Type B Mark II, known informally as the Paraset, was a remarkable piece of engineering. It weighed approximately 9 kilograms, roughly 20 pounds, and could be disassembled into components small enough to fit in a suitcase. But suitcases were precisely the problem. German counterintelligence units operating under the Sicherheitsdienst and the Funkabwehr, the Wireless Detection Service, had by late 1941 deployed direction-finding vans throughout occupied northern France with a sophistication that shocked even experienced British signals officers. These vehicles, which resembled ordinary delivery lorries, carried rotatable loop antennae capable of triangulating a transmission to within a few hundred meters after as few as 3 separate fixes. An agent who transmitted for more than 20 minutes from the same location was, by reasonable statistical estimate, operating with a life expectancy measurable in days. Marguerite's issued set had been destroyed. The courier who was supposed to deliver it had been arrested at a checkpoint outside Rouen in September, and the set, concealed beneath a false bottom in a milkmaid's pail, had been found. The courier, a young man of 22 from Bordeaux whose real name records do not preserve, was shot 3 days later. Marguerite was now in France, With a network of 8 local contacts producing intelligence of genuine value, German troop movements, fuel depot locations, the approximate strength of coastal defenses near Dieppe, and no means whatsoever of transmitting any of it. London did not know whether she was alive. She did not know whether London still knew she existed. What she had was her training, and a toaster. The facility that trained Marguerite Beaumont in wireless telegraphy was Thames Park in Oxfordshire, a requisitioned country estate that served as the SOE's primary signals training school from 1941 onwards. The instructors there, many of them post office engineers, BBC technicians, and amateur wireless enthusiasts who had been pulled into the war effort, had developed a curriculum that was, by the standards of any pre-war educational institution, frankly, extraordinary. Students were taught not merely to operate standard equipment, but to understand the underlying principles of radio transmission at a level sufficient to improvise, repair, and, in extremity, construct. One instructor, a former Marconi engineer named Frederick Hayward, ran a specific module he called Field Expedients, which amounted in essence to a course in building wireless transmitters from whatever happened to be available. Vacuum valves could be salvaged from broken domestic wirelesses. Condensers, capacitors in modern terminology, could be fabricated from layers of tin foil and waxed paper. A coil of resistance wire, wound to a specific number of turns around a cylinder of known diameter, could serve as an inductor. The antenna was simply a length of wire, ideally strung horizontally at a height that would be unremarkable from below. A washing line, a telephone wire, a length of copper tucked beneath roof slates. The Siemens toaster Marguerite was working with contained approximately 3 meters of high-quality nichrome resistance wire, wound on a mica former. Nichrome, an alloy of nickel and chromium, was prized by wireless builders precisely because its resistance per unit length was consistent and predictable. The wire from a single domestic toaster of this type, unwound and carefully measured, could produce an inductor of sufficient quality to form the tank circuit of a simple transmitter oscillator. The valve she had recovered from the Tabac Wireless was an older European type, a pentode intended for audio amplification, but workable as a transmitter valve if the operating conditions were handled correctly. The condensers she had stolen from the workshop of the local German signals detachment, 2 small units, each roughly the size of a matchbox, which she replaced with convincing-looking but entirely non-functional pieces of plastic she carved from a broken hairbrush handle. The resulting transmitter was a crystal-controlled design, operating at approximately 7 MHz, a frequency in the pre-war amateur bands that the SOE receiving stations in southern England monitored continuously. The crystal itself, the most critical and irreplaceable component, she had concealed from the beginning, sewn into the hem of her nurse's cape. This single piece of quartz, smaller than a human thumbnail, cut to resonate at a precise frequency and coated with vacuum-deposited metal electrodes, was the item she had been most careful to protect. Everything else could, in principle, be improvised. The crystal could not. It was manufactured at the General Electric Company's facility at Wembley, and it was, in the autumn of 1941, worth more than Marguerite Beaumont's weight in gold. The entire construction, from beginning to first transmission, took her 22 days. She worked only at night, and only for intervals of an hour or less, concealing each component beneath the floorboards of her room when not in active assembly. The finished device was housed in what had once been a biscuit tin, a British one, ironically brought over by some pre-war traveler, and measured roughly 20 centimeters by 15 by 8, roughly the size of a hardback novel. It drew its power from the farmhouse main supply through a transformer she wound herself on the ferrite core of a broken doorbell transformer. The main supply in that part of France ran at a different voltage from British standard, which complicated her calculations and required her to rewind the transformer twice before the output was stable enough to operate the valve without burning it out. If you are finding this interesting, a quick subscribe helps more than you know. Her first transmission was sent on the evening of November 14, 1941, at precisely 21 minutes past 8, from the cellar of a different farmhouse 3 kilometers from where she was staying. The transmission lasted 6 minutes and 40 seconds. It contained, in Morse code, using the personal code she had memorized during training at Tame Park, intelligence regarding the precise disposition of German coastal artillery batteries at 4 separate locations along the Seine-Maritime coast, information that would, within 8 months, inform the planning of the Dieppe raid, with all the complex and contested consequences that operation would carry. She then disassembled the transmitter, wrapped it in oilcloth, buried it beneath a pig pen, and walked back to the farmhouse in the dark. London received her signal clearly. The signals officer on duty at the receiving station near Beaulieu in Hampshire noted in his log that the transmission showed unusual frequency stability and unexpectedly clean keying for a clandestine set, a technical compliment that, in the circumstances, Marguerite would not receive for several years. The Germans had their own approaches to the communications problem, and they are instructive for understanding just how improvised Marguerite's solution actually was. The Abwehr and the Sicherheitsdienst both equipped their own agents in Britain and elsewhere with the AFU, the Agentenfunk, a series of clandestine transmitter-receiver sets manufactured by specialist firms. The best known of these, the Tornister-Empfänger, or rucksack receiver, was a precision instrument, crystal-controlled, factory-assembled, and tested to a military specification. Its companion transmitter was similarly manufactured to exacting standards, with tolerances measured in hundredths of a millimeter. German signals engineering was, on a factory floor, broadly comparable to anything the British or Americans were producing. The difference was in the philosophy of deployment. German agents were expected to use proper equipment. The idea of a field operative constructing a working transmitter from domestic appliance components would have struck most Abwehr planners as either absurd or admirable, depending on their temperament. The American OSS, the Office of Strategic Services, the American counterpart to SOE, took a different path again. Their Joan Eleanor system, developed in 1943, used ultra-high-frequency transmissions at around 260 MHz that were practically impossible for German direction-finding equipment to intercept at ground level, since the transmission was beamed almost vertically upward to a circling aircraft overhead. It was an elegant solution, but one that required substantial aviation infrastructure and was therefore unavailable to an isolated agent in 1941. What Marguerite achieved with her toaster wire and borrowed valve was, comparatively speaking, not elegant at all. It was stubborn, resourceful, and rather brilliant. The actual historical impact of her transmissions is, like so much of SOE history, partially obscured by classification and the deliberate destruction of records. Churchill personally ordered the burning of many SOE operational files in 1945, fearing that their contents, which detailed networks, methods, and names of agents and collaborators, would endanger lives in the post-war political reshaping of Europe. What survives in the National Archives at Kew is fragmentary. Marguerite Beaumont's file, declassified in tranches between 1998 and 2014, runs to approximately 40 pages, of which 11 are still partially redacted. What those pages do confirm is that she transmitted from the same improvised set on 14 separate occasions between November 1941 and March 1942, each time from a different location, always for less than 10 minutes, and always using frequencies and schedules that she adjusted slightly between transmissions to complicate direction finding. She was never detected. The intelligence she provided was assessed, according to a post-war evaluation by MY6, as material of significant operational value. The Dieppe raid of August 1942, Operation Jubilee, was one of the bloodiest and most controversial Allied operations of the war, resulting in approximately 3,600 casualties among the nearly 6,100 men who landed. The historiography of that operation is complex and contested, but what is not contested is that prior intelligence about German coastal defenses in the area was, in the words of the official post-war inquiry, incomplete and in several respects significantly inaccurate. The positions Marguerite had transmitted were among the more reliable data points available to the planners. That the operation nonetheless resulted in catastrophic losses speaks less to the quality of her intelligence than to the broader strategic miscalculations of the planning process, a fact that historians have noted with varying degrees of directness. She was extracted from France in April 1942 via a Lysander aircraft landing on a field near Évreux. She was 34 years old. She weighed, by her own account recorded in her debrief, nearly 9 kilograms less than when she had been inserted, and she brought with her, wrapped in the same oilcloth, the transmitter she had built from the German corporal's toaster. It is, according to the archival record, the only device of its type known to have survived the war intact. It was examined by engineers at SOE Signals Directorate, who, according to a note in the file, expressed considerable interest in its construction. Diplomatic language that in context almost certainly means they were impressed that it worked at all. The transmitter is listed in a 1946 inventory as having been transferred to a storage facility. Its current whereabouts are, as far as this account can determine, unknown. It does not appear in the collections of the Imperial War Museum, the National Army Museum, or any other institution that has been consulted. It may have been disposed of during the post-war clearances. It may be in a box somewhere in a government archive, unidentified and uncatalogued. The possibility that it survives is not impossible. The probability is low. Marguerite Beaumont returned to nursing after the war. She worked in the National Health Service from its foundation in 1948 until her retirement in 1971, latterly as a ward sister at a hospital in East Yorkshire whose name her declassified file does not specify. She never gave an interview. She never wrote a memoir. She was awarded the MBE in the 1946 New Year Honors List, a decoration that, for what she had done, represents a degree of official understatement that borders on the comic. She died in 1988. Return, for a moment, to that kitchen table in Ophé in October 1941. The mist is still over the fields. The German patrol has completed its circuit and returned to its billets. The candle burns low. A woman with cold hands and remarkable focus has before her a dismantled toaster and a problem that most trained engineers would have declared insolvable with the available materials. She does not declare it insolvable. She takes the resistance wire between her fingers and begins, very carefully, to measure. In the broader history of the Second World War, the signals intelligence war is frequently reduced to the headline narratives: Bletchley Park, Enigma, the ultra-secret, the code breakers in their huts with their bomb machines and their crossword puzzles. These stories are real and important, but they represent one end of a communications spectrum. At the other end were people like Marguerite Beaumont, working not with rooms full of mathematicians and industrial machinery, but with their training, their intelligence, and whatever they could find. The toaster gave her nichrome wire. The nichrome wire gave her a coil. The coil gave her a circuit. The circuit gave her a transmitter. The transmitter gave her a voice. And for 6 minutes and 40 seconds on the evening of November 14, 1941, in the dark of a French cellar, that voice reached England. She was a nurse who understood electricity, a spy who understood risk, and an engineer who understood that the gap between what you have and what you need is, most of the time, simply a problem waiting to be solved. The Germans had better equipment. Marguerite Beaumont had better judgment. The equipment did not win.